So this is about covers, in this case mesh. It's a woven nylon thread, quite close spacing. It's the standard Enviromesh original mesh cover. And why to use covers like this, and when, and over which vegetables? And there's a nice selection here, and the cover is for different reasons. So for example here, French beans was rabbits. Not actually now, but it's kind of easier to cover the whole bed. When they're small, we've got quite a few rabbits here, and they love to eat the little leaves of the seedlings, and you can lose your plants quite quickly. Now they'll be all right, and it may not be that long before we take this cover off, but there's one or two things where it's still really benefiting, like kale, brassica, so it's keeping off the summer insects like the butterflies, and to some extent the flea beetles. I find though it doesn't totally keep flea beetles off. It makes a very worthwhile difference, but not 100%. And then new planting of endive. Rabbits love them. They love the new seedlings more than anything, and they love endive and chicory actually more than lettuce even. But when I first planted the lettuce beyond the endive nearer to you as small seedlings, they pretty much disappeared overnight. That was before I had the cover on, and because the rabbits have been breeding recently and they've suddenly appeared. So the lettuce have really benefited. But at this stage here, we find they don't eat them so much now. And beyond that, you can see some carrot seedlings coming up between the furthest lettuce, which have almost finished cropping. And again, rabbits really like that. So in this case, it's rabbits and insects. And there's one particular insect which I'll mention here, and that's something called GhoulMitch. And it's over Swedes in this case. So these are Swedes transplanted 3 weeks ago here, following peas for shoots. And what I find is if I don't keep the cover in place, in fact, it's happened there. It's either that or a rabbit, but I think it's the GhoulMitch probably. It eats out the heart leaf of the growing plant. And that means that the plant for a while loses the ability to grow until it can make side shoots, and the Swede just doesn't develop as a big root. You get quite a stunted, much smaller Swede. These look fine. I don't mind losing one, that often happens. And you can see other insect damage here, but that actually I worry about less. It's just that eating out of the heart. So just on certain occasions it's good to know specifically what pests you need to worry about. Another one is later in their life is carrot root fly, and I can show you over here the result of using mesh on larger carrots. This bed has been covered since we sowed the carrots on 19th of March. And initially the cover was fleece, which is much warmer than mesh. So in the spring, I actually use mesh very little. And there are, generally speaking, less insects at that time of year. So we swapped the fleece for mesh after about 7 or 8 weeks, once the carrots had really got going. It was carrots and radish actually, and had a nice crop of radish as well. And now we've been harvesting the carrots for 5 or 6 weeks, and then make little holes where harvest a gap to pop in a Brussels sprout plant. So that's what's going on here, an overlap of plants intercropping the Brussels between the carrots, and fairly soon the final carrot harvest will happen, and then it will be a bed of just Brussels sprout for the late autumn and winter harvest. So it's very productive, and not adding any compost at any stage except at the beginning. I'll just show you the carrots and how they're pretty nice, and how well it's working with the mesh over, because it is keeping off the carrot root fly, which is a little fly that you don't often see just flying around, and it lays its eggs on the soil, and then the larvae burrow down and eat the carrot. And at this time of year that can really cause quite a bit of damage. You can see these are lovely and clean. They're coming out so clean, partly because it's no dig with initial compost layer, and then because it's dry as well. And we are watering, not the carrots, but we've been giving water to the Brussels sprout because that needs it. But the mesh is basically serving dual purpose. It's keeping insects, the carrot fly off, and it's keeping the brassica insects and butterflies off the Brussels. And there may be one or two holes. All my mesh covers, I haven't bought any mesh for 3 or 4 years now, which is why, as we saw the GhoulMitch damage to the Swede, there was a little hole actually in the mesh, and it's still okay, it's mostly working, but as they get older you get a little bit of degradation. And I've got some mesh covers that are 10 years old now and they're still working more or less. There comes a time though when maybe you do need to change them. Water goes through, so you don't need to worry about extra watering or anything. Light levels good at this time of year, there's plenty of light, so the covers have a lot to recommend them from that point of view. And we'll just have a look at 2 other crops which benefit, and also the snag that can happen from holes in the mesh. The beds I'm covering here have an older planting and a newer planting, and this older planting is of cabbage, which followed broad beans in fact. So there were broad beans growing here until 13th of June, which is a month ago. And after cutting them off at the ground, we planted cabbage. So these have been in just over 4 weeks, and all the time they've had mesh on. And when they were small, they had hoops supporting the mesh, because this mesh can get quite heavy, particularly when it's wet. In wet weather, I have seen some quite bad damage when it's sitting on plants, seedlings that is. But once the plants get to this size, and as we saw with the carrots before, they're strong enough that they can just support the mesh themselves, so you don't need hoops anymore. I mean, carry on with hoops if you want. We actually haven't got enough hoops. So what we did this week, just 3 days ago, we harvested potatoes here, and on the same day we planted these leeks. And before putting the cover on, we moved the hoops that were here to this bed. So when the leeks are small, the hoops are bearing the weight of the mesh. These are multi-sown leeks, by the way, that were sown 3 months ago. And later on, the leeks will be able to support the weight of the mesh as they push it up. And again, this is older mesh even actually than what we saw before. There are some holes here, and a few insects do find their way through, and I can just show you here what happens. I'm just keeping an eye on these plants actually, because in case a caterpillar does become visible. And on Thursday, 3 days ago, I did find in here, you can see this plant very eaten, 2 big brown caterpillars. And the guy who was helping, he said he recognised them. He said it was the Angleshades moth. And a lot of damage is done by moths, more than butterflies, and moths tend to fly at night. You don't see them, so you're not really aware of them. And that's what the cover is on for the leeks. It's called leek moth. It's a little brown moth again that you probably never see, but it comes at night and it lays its eggs in the heart of the growing leek, usually in August, but we're ready for it by getting the cover on before. And the little maggot or larva chews out the developing leaves of the leek plant, so they kind of, for a while they look okay. It's not the outer leaves getting eaten, and then you suddenly realise they're not growing. And so keep an eye out for that one. We've got it here, this region, southwest England. Quite a lot of southern England, I think, has leek moth. I'm not sure how far north it has got. If you haven't got it, then fine, you wouldn't need to cover your leeks. So that's the thing about using covers like this, you know, it's just being aware of what might happen, the potential damage, and covering accordingly, and just for the length of time that's needed. So here, for these cabbage, for example, this variety is called Filderkraut, and it can get really tall. When they start developing, the cabbage plants will be up here. And that will mean that I don't then have enough mesh. This cover's not wide enough. It's just a 2 metre wide mesh. And if you get crops growing up tall and then you suddenly haven't got a cover at the side because it's all got used up by the crop pushing it up, and then the insects just fly in. So it won't be long before we actually just take this mesh off here, and then I keep the caterpillars at bay by spraying Bacillus thuringiensis, which is a soil bacteria. It's a natural product you can buy as a powder. Spray it on brassica leaves every 20 days, roughly 18-20 days. I haven't done any spraying yet, but it won't be long now. And that it just makes the leaves indigestible to caterpillars. So that's an alternative to using mesh. I mean, you could have a wider mesh and just keep it covered all summer. I actually quite like seeing my plants. That's one downside of a mesh, is the garden looks a bit sort of white, and it's prettier when you can see the plants. And we'll finish off looking at one or two other aspects of using mesh covers. The cover we put on here, the mesh cover, at the time of planting, which was 13 days ago, I'd run out of hoops, so we thought, well, we've got to get it on because this is chicory. And rabbits love chicory, seedlings particularly. So it just went straight on the quite small seedlings. And you can see how it's not too bad in terms of the weight, partly because it's been mostly dry weather. We've just been watering through it every 2 or 3 days. But the plants are fine, actually. I would just have been happier to have had some hoops. And definitely if it had been wet weather, I don't think this would have worked. There's chicory and kale up there. You see how the kale is pushing up a bit more strongly than the chicory. But these will be fine, and we're just going to keep this cover on like this, or we might put some hoops in even now, actually. We'll see how it goes. Finally, I'll show you a different kind of cover that you can use in summer and for a different reason. So this bed has lettuce which we planted 20 days ago. They were 24-day-old seedlings, and then the weather got, for us, unusually hot, and over the solstice, just after the solstice, really strong sun in our terms. And we found that even with watering every 2 days, say, that it was difficult to keep enough moisture around the roots of newly transplanted seedlings. When they get older, like these lettuce plants, although they're smaller, they're much older. They were sown February, planted March, and we've been picking them every week. And we recently picked them, that's why they're still quite small. But they've got a much stronger root system, an older plant like that. And so they can tolerate the drying out a little bit on the surface, whereas these ones haven't yet got their roots down quite so much and need more regular watering when they're small. And this leads me on to the cover, because what we find now with summer planting of lettuce almost exclusively, not anything else really, because they're so watery, you know, that it's all about water really with lettuce. A cover like this can just keep the fiercest of the sun and the light off while they're developing. So it's nearly 3 weeks now, and you can see how they've grown really well. They look lovely, they look lush. That is from watering 3 times a week pretty much, but it hasn't rained at all. And I'm now taking the cover off, and this cover is something called thermocrop. I would have used mesh if I'd had enough. We ran out of mesh, so all this extra covering against sun. And so I thought, well, I had this, and it's sold as a fleece alternative. So, you know, it's kind of a warmth retaining material a little bit, but not as much as fleece, I find. I find fleece is warmer than this one. It has got more ventilation, and it has really worked well for these lettuce. So that's thermocrop, there's another option. And then you could use that in spring. We find it works not bad. I still prefer fleece, as I say, but it does serve as a cover for spring crops to keep the cold winds off, particularly. We've also got this one on some French beans up there, and it's been working really well for them. So there you have it. I hope you've enjoyed seeing some different covers and of different ages, different supports, different crops, different timings, how you can easily and quickly put them on and then take them off again, and just being on it a bit, and how much it unlocks the potential of summer, because if you get pests eating things, really that end of story. So check out the covers and have fun using them.